The mission begins in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, where the stars flickered like distant, indifferent sentinels. The EAS Phoenix cut through the void with a silent determination. This lone warship, a testament to humanity's ingenuity and defiance, carried within its armored hull the hopes and dreams of an entire species, and indeed the last flickering hopes of many alien civilizations who had long suffered under the brutal heel of the Zorgo Empire. The Zorgo, a reptilian race with an insatiable thirst for conquest, had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, their armadas laying waste to countless worlds, enslaving billions, and stripping entire planets of their natural resources. They were the undisputed overlords of the galaxy, and their reign of terror seemed unassailable, until now. At the helm of the Phoenix stood Captain John Skora, a man whose very presence seemed to radiate a quiet, unyielding resolve. Skora was a master tactician, his mind as sharp as the blade he kept sheathed at his side, and his heart burned with the fire of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, but refused to give in to despair. His crew, a hand-picked team of Earth's finest soldiers, engineers, and scientists, shared his unwavering determination. They knew that their mission, one ship against the might of an entire empire, was by all accounts a suicide mission. But they also knew that failure was not an option. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders. As the Phoenix hurtled towards its destination, the heart of the Zorgo Empire, Captain Skora gathered his senior officers in the ship's briefing room. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the holographic display in the center of the table, which projected a detailed map of Zorgo space. The map was a tangle of star systems, each one marked with red icons indicating the presence of enemy forces. It was an overwhelming sight, but Skora's voice was steady as he addressed his team. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes scanning the faces of those seated around the table. Commander Eric Voss, his first officer, a battle-hardened veteran with a scarred face that told of countless battles fought and won. Lieutenant Alara Cal, the Cobol science officer, whose violet eyes seemed to see through to the very heart of any problem. And Sergeant Thomas Reyes, the infiltration expert, whose easy smile belied the deadly precision with which he executed his missions. "Our objective is clear. We are to infiltrate the Zorgo homeworld, locate the source of their power, and neutralize it. This is our one and only shot. If we fail, there will be no second chance." The gravity of the situation was not lost on any of them. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but they also knew that they had something the Zorgo did not: humanity's indomitable spirit and the element of surprise. The Phoenix ghosted into orbit around the Zorgo homeworld, its advanced stealth systems rendering it invisible to the enemy sensors. The planet below was a sickly yellow-green, its atmosphere choked with pollution and its surface marred by the scars of centuries of industrial exploitation. The Imperial Palace, their target, rose from the muck like a grotesque tumor, pulsing with vile energy. It was a fortress of unimaginable proportions, guarded by legions of bloodthirsty warriors and bristling with advanced weaponry. But Skora and his team were not deterred. Disguised as Zorgo nobles in shimmering black robes, they descended to the planet's surface in a cloaked shuttle. The grand hall of the palace was a wretched hive of decadence and cruelty, filled with Zorgo aristocrats whose reptilian bulk glistened under the sickly light. Slaves of a dozen races scurried between them, bearing trays of drink and food, cringing from the casual cruelty of their masters. Skora's face tightened with disgust as he surveyed the scene. "Fan out," he signaled to his team through their secure comms. "Find what we came for." They drifted apart, playing the roles of party guests while scanning for any clue to the Zorgo's source of power. Alara's stolen schematics guided them through the labyrinth of the palace, leading them to a hidden stairway that descended deep into the bowels of the fortress. The ancient vaults beneath the palace were a place of death and darkness, filled with secrets that had been buried for millennia. Strange whispers echoed from the shadows as Skora and his crew pushed deeper into the maze. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, its walls pulsing with malevolent light. At the center of the chamber, On a throne of obsidian sat a colossal crystal that seethed with darkness. Waves of dread rolled from it, and the humans stumbled under the psychic onslaught. "By the stars!" Alara breathed, her voice filled with awe and terror. "This is the source of their power, an ancient evil from beyond the void." Her scans confirmed what they had suspected. The Zorgo had sold their souls to this dark entity in exchange for dominion over the galaxy. Skora's eyes hardened as he raised his plasma rifle. "This ends now," he declared, his voice filled with righteous fury. But before he could fire, alarms shrieked and hidden doors crashed open. Zorgo warriors flooded the chamber, their weapons crackling with lethal energy. The humans reacted instantly, finding cover and returning fire. Plasma bolts and razor shards filled the air as the battle raged through the eldritch vault. In the chaos, Skora saw Alara fall, swarmed by Zorgo drones. He started towards her, but a seething wall of energy cut him off. Out of the flames strode a towering figure, his armor drinking in the light, eyes like burning coals fixed on Skora. "Did you think you could deceive me, human?" The Emperor hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "I have foreseen your coming. Your science officer is mine. Surrender, or she dies before your eyes." Skora's mind raced, buying time as he signaled Eric and Thomas. He lowered his weapon, playing the part of the defeated captive. As he approached the Emperor, he caught Alara's eye. A look of understanding passed between them. She knew what had to be done. In a blur of motion, Skora rolled to the side as Eric and Thomas opened fire, a storm of plasma and shatter rounds engulfing the dark crystal, boring into its malignant heart. The Emperor screamed in rage and agony, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. He lashed out with tendrils of malevolent force, but it was too late. The crystal exploded in a geyser of light and shadow, a wail of fury and despair shaking the foundations of the palace as the entity bound within burst free, its power broken. The Emperor collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, and the Zorgo warriors reeled in confusion. Skora was moving before the echoes faded, charging the Emperor's retinue. "Alara!" he shouted as he cut down the guards holding her. She shook off their grasp and scooped up a fallen weapon, falling in beside her captain as they fought free of the melee. "Surrender!" Skora roared at the stricken Emperor. "Call off your forces!" But the tyrant's eyes flashed with manic light. "Never!" he spat, inputting a code into his gauntlet. "If I cannot have this galaxy, no one will." The palace lurched as explosive charges detonated deep within its roots. Cracks raced up the walls and the floor buckled. Skora and his team sprinted for the shuttle as the building collapsed around them, dragging the screaming Emperor along with them. They reached the landing pad just as the palace crumbled, the shockwave hurling them into the shuttle. Thomas punched the engines, and the small craft leapt for the safety of space. Behind them, the Imperial Palace sank into the bubbling mire, the flag of the Zorgo Empire burning to ash on its spires. In the shuttle hold, the Emperor raved and thrashed against his bonds, his eyes empty and mad. Skora slumped in his seat, exhausted, elated, and sick with dread all at once. They had cut off the serpent's head, but how many more would rise to take its place? The Overlord's fell influence was broken, but its servants remained, and not all would submit to defeat. The galaxy hovered on a blade's edge between liberation and anarchy. The battle was just getting started, but for now they had struck a blow for freedom, and the Phoenix flew on, carrying the hopes of all those who resisted the Zorgo's dark dominion. There were whispers of other human ships joining the fight, and reports of uprisings on Zorgo-held worlds. A spark had been lit, and it was up to Skora and his crew to fan it into a flame that would burn away the last vestiges of tyranny. The fight for survival. The Phoenix streaked through the starry void, its hull still bearing scorch marks from the battle at the Zorgo homeworld. On the ship's bridge, Captain John Skora stood before a holographic display of the galaxy, watching as vast swathes of former Zorgo territory flickered between different colors, indicating the growing unrest across the Empire. The Zorgo Empire, once a monolithic force of oppression, was tearing itself apart in the wake of the Emperor's fall. Every warlord, every admiral with a fleet, was making a grab for power, seeking to carve out their own dominion from the chaos. Skora's face was grim as he turned to his first officer, Commander Eric Voss. "We're caught in the middle of it all," Skora muttered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the shifting borders and the reports of skirmishes and power struggles erupting across the galaxy. The Zorgo's fall had ignited a firestorm, and it was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Commander Voss leaned forward, his battle-scarred face illuminated by the hologram's glow. "We need to act, Captain. If we don't stabilize the situation, the entire galaxy could descend into chaos." Skora nodded, his mind racing as he considered their options. They couldn't be everywhere at once, and the forces they had were stretched thin, already engaged in battles on multiple fronts. Lieutenant Alara Cal, her violet eyes fixed on the display, pointed to a cluster of systems near the Galactic core. "Reports indicate that Warlord Cass Gorn controls the largest rebel faction. He's been reaching out to other dissident groups, trying to form a coalition. If we can secure an alliance with him, we might have a chance at bringing some order to this mess." Skora's gaze followed her finger to the sector she had indicated. It was a strategic position, one that could serve as a rallying point for the scattered rebel forces. "Then that's where we start," he said decisively. "Set a course for Gorn's stronghold." The Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace above a fortress world bristling with defenses. The planet below was a fortress, its surface covered in massive gun emplacements, shield generators, and hangars filled with warships. As they approached, a gruff voice crackled over the comms. "Unidentified vessel, state your business or be vaporized." Skora leaned towards the comm panel, his voice calm but commanding. "This is Captain John Skora of the EAS Phoenix. We're here to see Warlord Gorn." There was a tense moment of silence, during which the ship's crew held their breath. Then the voice returned, its tone grudgingly respectful. "Proceed to Docking Bay 7. Any hostile action will result in immediate termination." The Phoenix glided into the cavernous hangar, its landing struts settling onto the deck with a soft thud. Skora led his team down the ramp, where they were met by a contingent of heavily armed Zorgo soldiers. At their head stood a towering figure in obsidian armor. "I am Warlord Cass Gorn," the Zorgo rumbled, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he took in the humans before him. "You have courage, human, coming here?" Skora met his gaze unflinchingly. "We have a common enemy, Warlord, the Loyalists who would see the old regime restored." Gorn's scaled lips curled into what might have been a smile. "Indeed," he said, his voice a low growl. "Come, let us speak privately." In Gorn's war room, a dimly lit chamber dominated by a massive tactical display, Skora laid out his plan. He spoke of strike teams targeting Loyalist supply lines, surgical attacks on key installations, and a campaign to win the hearts and minds of occupied worlds. Gorn listened intently, occasionally interjecting with tactical suggestions of his own. As the strategy took shape, a fire kindled in the warlord's eyes. "You understand, human?" Gorn said, his voice filled with a grim determination. "The old ways cannot stand. We must forge a new path." Their alliance was sealed with a clasping of hands, human and Zorgo, united against a common foe. But not all were pleased with this development. As Skora and his team prepared to depart, a commotion erupted in the hangar. A group of Zorgo warriors, led by a scarred veteran, blocked their path. The warrior's eyes burned with hatred as he spat. "You would let these mammals dictate our future? The Zorgo should rule alone!" Skora tensed, his hand inching towards his sidearm. But before the situation could escalate further, alarms blared throughout the fortress. A panicked voice came over the intercom. "Loyalist fleet inbound! Multiple dreadnoughts detected." Gorn spun towards the nearest console, barking orders to his men. Skora turned to his team, his voice sharp and urgent. "Back to the Phoenix! We're about to get our first taste of battle." They raced up the ramp as the hangar doors slid open, revealing a sky ablaze with weapons fire. The Phoenix rocketed into the fray, joining Gorn's defenders against the Loyalist onslaught. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the void as capital ships exchanged broadsides, and fighters dueled in swirling dogfights, explosions blooming like deadly flowers in the darkness of space. On the Phoenix's bridge, Skora called out orders as they weaved through the chaos. "Target the lead dreadnought's engines," he barked. "Voss, get our point defense grid online." The battle raged for hours, a crucible of fire and destruction, as ships on both sides fell to enemy fire. The Phoenix shuddered under the impact of enemy blasts, but Skora's crew held firm, their training and discipline keeping them in the fight. Slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. "Archon Dracos' flagship. Alara cried out, her voice cutting through the din of battle. Its shields are failing! Skora saw his chance. Prepare a boarding party, he ordered, his voice filled with determination. We end this now. The Phoenix maneuvered closer to the crippled flagship, its hull barely holding together under the relentless barrage of enemy fire. As they approached, Skora led the boarding party onto Archon Dracos' ship, plasma bolts sizzling through the air as they fought their way to the bridge. The massive doors buckled under the force of Eric's demolition charge, and they surged inside. Archon Dracos stood defiant at the center of the bridge, his energy blade crackling with deadly power. "You cannot defeat the Zorgo Empire, human!" he snarled, his eyes blazing with a maniacal fury. "It's already done," Skora replied, raising his vibroblade to meet the Archon's challenge. The ensuing duel was brief but fierce, their weapons clashing in a flurry of sparks and searing energy. Dracos' strength was formidable, but Skora's speed and persistence won out. With a final decisive strike, Skora disarmed his opponent, sending the Archon crashing to the deck. "It's over," Skora said, lowering his weapon as the remaining Zorgo crew, their will to fight evaporating with their leader's defeat, stood down. As Skora's team secured the bridge, reports flooded in from across the sector. The Zorgo fleet was in disarray, their homeworld erupting into chaos as news of Dracos' fall spread. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Alara's voice crackled over the comms, filled with a fear that sent a chill down Skora's spine. "Captain, we're detecting a massive energy surge from a remote Zorgo colony. It's gone. The entire population wiped out in minutes." Skora's blood ran cold. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with dread. "Unknown, sir," Alara replied, her voice shaking. "But we're picking up transmissions from a group calling themselves the Purifiers. They're claiming responsibility." The celebration aboard the captured flagship died instantly as the full weight of this new threat settled over them. Skora's mind raced, analyzing the situation, trying to make sense of the madness. They had defeated the Zorgo, but now a new danger had emerged. One that threatened not just the remnants of the Empire, but the entire galaxy. "Get me everything we have on these Purifiers," Skora ordered, his voice filled with a steely resolve. "Now!" Hours later, the grim picture became clear. The Purifiers, a fanatical splinter group led by the unstable Commander Varn, had acquired a stockpile of the Zorgo's own doomsday virus. Their goal, the complete extermination of the Zorgo species. Skora convened an emergency meeting with his top officers, the weight of the galaxy's fate pressing down on his shoulders. "We need to move fast," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Eric, I want you coordinating with our scientists to develop a counter-virus. Alara, use every intelligence asset we have to track down Varn's cells. Thomas, prep our strike teams. We're going hunting." The next days were a blur of frantic activity as the Phoenix and her sister ships raced from system to system, battling Purifier forces and desperately trying to halt the virus's spread. The Purifiers moved with ruthless efficiency, their attacks devastating entire colonies before anyone could react. It was a relentless campaign of genocide, one that threatened to undo everything the Alliance had fought for. Skora knew they were running out of time. The virus was spreading faster than they could contain it, and the galaxy was teetering on the brink of a catastrophe from which there might be no return. Finally, they caught a break. Intelligence pinpointed a heavily fortified Purifier base on a barren moon, a world far from the usual trade routes and hidden deep within a nebula that made scanning difficult. It was the heart of the Purifier operation, the place where Varn and his fanatics had been manufacturing and deploying the virus. Skora knew they had to strike now. Energy beams crisscrossed the void as capital ships exchanged broadsides, and fighters dueled in swirling dogfights, explosions blooming like deadly flowers in the darkness of space. On the Phoenix's bridge, Skora called out orders as they weaved through the chaos. "Target the lead dreadnought's engines," he barked. "Voss, get our point defense grid online." The battle raged for hours, a crucible of fire and destruction, as ships on both sides fell to enemy fire. The Phoenix shuddered under the impact of enemy blasts, but Skora's crew held firm, their training and discipline keeping them in the fight. Slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. "Archon Dracos' flagship!" Alara cried out, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "Its shields are failing!" Skora saw his chance. "Prepare a boarding party," he ordered, his voice filled with determination. "We end this now." The Phoenix maneuvered closer to the crippled flagship, its hull barely holding together under the relentless barrage of enemy fire. As they approached, Skora led the boarding party onto Archon Dracos' ship, plasma bolts sizzling through the air as they fought their way to the bridge. The massive doors buckled under the force of Eric's demolition charge, and they surged inside. Archon Dracos stood defiant at the center of the bridge, his energy blade crackling with deadly power. "You cannot defeat the Zorgo Empire, human," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a maniacal fury. "It's already done," Skora replied, raising his vibroblade to meet the Archon's challenge. The ensuing duel was brief but fierce, their weapons clashing in a flurry of sparks and searing energy. Dracos' strength was formidable, but Skora's speed and persistence won out. With a final, decisive strike, Skora disarmed his opponent, sending the Archon crashing to the deck. "It's over," Skora said, lowering his weapon as the remaining Zorgo crew, their will to fight evaporating with their leader's defeat, stood down. As Skora's team secured the bridge, reports flooded in from across the sector. The Zorgo fleet was in disarray, their homeworld erupting into chaos as news of Dracos' fall spread. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Alara's voice crackled over the comms, filled with a fear that sent a chill down Skora's spine. "Captain, we're detecting a massive energy surge from a remote Zorgo colony. It's gone." The entire population wiped out in minutes. Skora's blood ran cold. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with dread. "Unknown, sir," Alara replied, her voice shaking. "But we're picking up transmissions from a group calling themselves the Purifiers. They're claiming responsibility." The celebration aboard the captured flagship died instantly as the full weight of this new threat settled over them. Skora's mind raced, analyzing the situation, trying to make sense of the madness. They had defeated the Zorgo, but now a new danger had emerged. One that threatened not just the remnants of the Empire, but the entire galaxy. "Get me everything we have on these purifiers," Skora ordered, his voice filled with a steely resolve. Now, hours later, the grim picture became clear. The Purifiers, a fanatical splinter group led by the unstable Commander Varn, had acquired a stockpile of the Zorgo's own doomsday virus. Their goal, the complete extermination of the Zorgo species. Skora convened an emergency meeting with his top officers, the weight of the galaxy's fate pressing down on his shoulders. "We need to move fast," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Eric, I want you coordinating with our scientists to develop a counter-virus. Alara, use every intelligence asset we have to track down Varn's cells. Thomas, prep our strike teams. We're going hunting." The next days were a blur of frantic activity as the Phoenix and her sister ships raced from system to system, battling Purifier forces and desperately trying to halt the virus's spread. The Purifiers moved with ruthless efficiency, their attacks devastating entire colonies before anyone could react. It was a relentless campaign of genocide, one that threatened to undo everything the Alliance had fought for. Skora knew they were running out of time. The virus was spreading faster than they could contain it, and the galaxy was teetering on the brink of a catastrophe from which there might be no return. Finally, they caught a break. Intelligence pinpointed a heavily fortified purifier base on a barren moon, a world far from the usual trade routes and hidden deep within a nebula that made scanning difficult. It was the heart of the purifier operation, the place where Varn and his fanatics had been manufacturing and deploying the virus. Skora knew they had to strike now, with everything they had left. The risk was enormous, but the alternative, allowing the purifiers to continue their rampage, was unthinkable. Skora led the assault himself, piloting a shuttle through the dense, swirling clouds of the nebula, the rest of the strike team following close behind. The moon loomed ahead, a cold, desolate rock scarred by deep craters and jagged mountains. As they descended, the shuttle's sensors pinged with alerts, automated defenses, energy barriers, and patrols. The purifiers had fortified this place well, expecting it to be their last stand. Skora's heart pounded in his chest as he keyed the comms. "All units, this is Skora. We hit them hard and fast, no time to waste. Stay sharp. And remember what's at stake here." As the shuttle touched down, the team disembarked swiftly, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. The moon's surface was harsh, the air thin and bitterly cold, but they had no time to worry about comfort. Plasma bolts lit up the night as they engaged the purifier guards, cutting through the enemy's defenses with precision and speed. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, every member performing their role flawlessly as they pushed towards the central compound where Varn was believed to be holed up. The battle was fierce. The purifiers fought with a fanaticism that bordered on madness, willing to die for their twisted cause. Skora and his team encountered traps, ambushes, and automated defenses that pushed them to their limits. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. The virus had to be stopped here, or countless more lives would be lost. Finally, they breached the main compound, a massive, heavily reinforced structure that hummed with the energy of the deadly virus being produced inside. As they entered, alarms blared and the lights flickered ominously. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each filled with the tools of the purifier's horrific work. The team split up, moving methodically through the base, planting charges on key infrastructure points and eliminating any resistance they encountered. Skora and Thomas reached the control center, a large chamber dominated by a central console and surrounded by massive tanks filled with the lethal virus. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals, and the low hum of machinery filled the room. Standing at the console, his back turned to them, was Commander Varn. He was a tall, gaunt figure, his face pale and eyes wild with a mixture of fear and zealotry. In his hand, he clutched a vial of the virus, its contents glowing with an eerie, sickly green light. "You don't understand, Skora," Varn hissed, not turning to face them. "This is the only way to ensure our safety. The Zorgo must be purged, every last one of them. It's the only way we can be sure that their evil will never rise again." Skora's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "You've become the very thing we fought against, Varn. Look at what you've done. You're not saving the galaxy, you're destroying it. Put the vial down and let's end this madness." For a moment, Varn hesitated, his hand trembling as he held the vial aloft. It was as if he was struggling with some inner conflict, torn between his twisted sense of duty and the reality of the destruction he had wrought. But then, his face hardened, and the madness in his eyes flared up once more. "No!" he snarled, turning to face Skora fully. "I won't let you stop us. The galaxy needs to be cleansed." He lunged towards a nearby console, his intent clear. If he activated the base's self-destruct mechanism, it would release the virus into the atmosphere, killing everyone on the moon and potentially spreading to nearby worlds. Thomas reacted instantly, tackling Varn to the ground. The two men grappled furiously, their struggle intense and desperate. Skora rushed to the console, working frantically to disable the self-destruct sequence. A shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Skora's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see Thomas stumble back, clutching his side where blood was beginning to spread through his uniform. Varn's lieutenant, a man as fanatical as his leader, stood in the doorway, weapon raised, a sneer of triumph on his face. But before he could fire another shot, Eric's return fire dropped the man where he stood. With a final desperate effort, Skora managed to disable the self-destruct. The console's screens went dark, and the machinery around them powered down, leaving the room eerily silent. Varn, now pinned beneath Thomas's weight, was secured and bound, the vial of virus safely in Skora's hands. The threat had been neutralized, but at a terrible cost. Thomas lay on the cold, hard floor, his breathing shallow, his face pale. Skora knelt beside him, his voice thick with emotion. "Hold on, Thomas. We'll get you to medical. You're going to be okay." Thomas managed a weak smile, his eyes glazing over with pain and exhaustion. Did we stop them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We did," Skora assured him, though his heart was heavy with grief. "You did good, kid. We stopped them, and the galaxy owes you a debt it can never repay." As medics rushed to stabilize Thomas and carry him to the waiting shuttle, Skora's attention turned to the crisis at hand. They had stopped Varn and captured the virus, but the damage had already been done. Entire worlds lay in ruin, their populations decimated by the Purifier's rampage, and the galaxy, still reeling from the fall of the Zorgo Empire, was more fragile than ever. In the aftermath, Skora called for an emergency summit of all allied races. The conference room aboard the Phoenix was packed with representatives from every corner of the galaxy, Zorgo separatists, human leaders, and envoys from countless other species. Tensions were running high as they argued over how to proceed, the room filled with the clamor of raised voices and heated debates. The purifiers must be executed, thundered a Threk delegate, his massive fists pounding the table, and the remaining Zorgo punished for their crimes. We cannot allow them to rebuild and threaten us again. Warlord Gorn, his scales rippling with barely suppressed anger, rose to his feet. More violence solves nothing, he growled, his voice filled with conviction. We must break this cycle. If we continue to fight each other, the galaxy will tear itself apart. We must find a way to live together in peace. Skora raised his hands for silence, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. We've all suffered, he said, his tone commanding and resolute. We've all lost, but if we give in to vengeance now, everything we've fought for will have been for nothing. I propose we put the purifiers on trial, let them face justice for their actions. And we must extend aid to the devastated Zorgo worlds. We cannot rebuild the galaxy on a foundation of hatred and destruction. The debate raged for hours, the representatives arguing fiercely over Skora's proposal. But in the end, his plan was adopted. It would be a long, difficult road to healing and rebuilding, but it was a start. As the delegates filed out, Skora remained in the conference room, his mind already turning to the next challenge. The galaxy was far from safe, and new threats were sure to emerge. But for now, they had taken the first step towards a better future. Alara approached Skora, her face etched with concern. "Captain," she said quietly, "long-range sensors just picked up something strange. An enormous vessel like nothing we've ever seen before. It's on a direct course for Zorgo space." Skora's weariness vanished, replaced by a familiar surge of adrenaline. "Origin?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Unknown," Alara replied, her voice filled with unease. "But it's coming from outside our galaxy." Skora stared out the viewport at the stars beyond, his mind racing with possibilities. After everything they'd been through, a new threat was emerging, one that could be even more dangerous than the Zorgo or the Purifiers. But this time they would face it together. "Alert the fleet," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Whatever's coming, we'll be ready." As the fleet prepared for battle, Skora knew that their fight for survival was far from over. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with unknown perils and hidden enemies. But with the Alliance united and the lessons of their past victories fresh in their minds, they would face whatever came next with courage and resolve. The alien juggernaut, the Phoenix's sensors blared to life, startling Captain Skora from his uneasy rest. He rushed to the bridge, heart pounding as the alarms grew louder and the ship's crew scrambled to their stations. The main view screen flickered, displaying a swirling maelstrom of energy at the edge of the galaxy, a massive spatial distortion that twisted space itself. "Report!" Skora barked, his eyes locked on the chaotic scene unfolding before them. Lieutenant Alara Kal, her hands flying over the console, looked up with a mixture of fear and awe. "Captain, it's the vessel we detected, a juggernaut unlike anything we've ever seen. It's emerging from the distortion, and it's massive. At least 10 times larger than any Zorgo dreadnought." Skora's breath caught in his throat as the view screen cleared, revealing the full extent of the alien vessel. It was a monstrous construct, its surface bristling with weapons and covered in a black, chitinous armor that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its shape defied conventional geometry, with sections of the ship phasing in and out of reality, as if it were only partially anchored in this dimension. The sheer size of the vessel was enough to dwarf even the largest ships in the Alliance fleet, and its energy readings were off the charts. Commander Eric Voss, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the data, stepped up beside Skora. "Those weapon placements? I've never seen anything like them, Captain. They're not just powerful. They're on a scale that could devastate entire planets." Skora's mind raced as he weighed their options. The Phoenix was one of the most advanced ships in the fleet, but even it seemed woefully outmatched by this behemoth. They needed a plan, something that could buy them time to assess the situation and rally the fleet. "All hands, this is the captain. Skora announced over the ship's comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We face an unprecedented threat. I won't sugarcoat it, this will be our greatest challenge yet. But we've overcome impossible odds before and we'll do it again. To your stations. Prepare for battle." The ragtag fleet, hastily assembled from the remnants of the Alliance and ships from various allied races, formed up around the Phoenix, a shining beacon of hope in the face of the coming storm. Skora knew that they were the last line of defense against whatever nightmare was approaching, and that their actions in the coming hours would determine the fate of countless worlds. Hours blurred into days as the fleet moved to intercept the alien juggernaut. The tension aboard the Phoenix was palpable, the crew moving with grim determination as they prepared for what could be their final battle. As they neared the projected intercept point, Skora called a final briefing. The bridge was crowded with officers, their faces illuminated by the eerie blue glow of the holographic displays. "Our tacticians have identified a potential weakness," Skora began, gesturing to a swirling nebula on the star chart. "This debris field will hamper its maneuverability. We'll use hit-and-run tactics, probe for weaknesses, and try to slow it down long enough for us to find a way to destroy it. This ship is the spearhead of an invasion force, and we cannot let it reach populated space." The officers nodded, their resolve evident despite the fear in their eyes. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew that there was no other choice. The plan set, the fleet moved into position, their ships fanning out to prepare for the imminent confrontation. When the alien juggernaut finally appeared, it was like nothing they had ever encountered. It didn't simply emerge from the spatial distortion. It tore its way into their reality, the space around it warping and crackling with energy as it solidified. The vessel's surface shifted and writhed as if it were alive, and its weapons crackled with malevolent energy. "All ships, engage!" Skora barked, his voice carrying the weight of command. Fighters swarmed from the carriers, darting towards the massive hull and unleashing a barrage of weapons fire. Larger vessels moved in behind them, their cannons and missile pods sending waves of destructive energy into the alien ship's shields. The Alliance fleet fought with everything they had, each ship pushing its systems to the limit as they harried the juggernaut from all sides. For hours, they engaged in a deadly dance, the fleet's ships darting in and out of the debris field, using the chaotic environment to their advantage. The juggernaut's shields flickered under the onslaught, and a cheer went up across the fleet as the first signs of damage appeared on the alien vessel's surface. "We're hurting it!" someone called out, the first glimmer of hope cutting through the tension. But the triumph was short-lived. The alien ship responded with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through the fleet. Searing beams of energy lanced out from its weapons, carving through entire squadrons in an instant. Ships that had survived countless battles were vaporized in moments, their wreckage scattered across the battlefield like so much debris. "Evasive maneuvers!" Skora shouted, gripping the armrests of his command chair as the Phoenix bucked under the impact of a near miss. The ship shuddered violently as a glancing blow tore through its hull, sending alarms blaring and systems failing across the board. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, Thomas reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're venting atmosphere." Skora's mind raced as he tried to come up with a way to turn the tide of the battle. The fleet was being torn apart, and their best efforts were barely slowing the juggernaut down. If they didn't find a way to stop it soon, there wouldn't be anything left to defend. "All hands, abandon ship," Skora ordered, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "Get to the escape pods. We'll regroup and fight another day." The crew hesitated for a moment, their loyalty to the Phoenix and their captain evident in their reluctance to leave. But they knew there was no other choice. One by one, the pods launched from the ship, scattering into the void as the Phoenix's systems continued to fail. Skora was among the last to leave, his heart breaking as he watched his beloved ship, the symbol of humanity's hope and resilience, break apart under the relentless assault. The explosion that marked the Phoenix's demise was visible even from the escape pods, a silent testament to the sacrifices that had been made. As the pods drifted through space, Skora struggled to stay conscious, his body battered and his mind reeling from the loss. But he knew they couldn't give up. Not yet. The fight was far from over. They were picked up by a medical frigate, the ship's hold filled with shell-shock survivors. Skora moved among them, offering what comfort he could, but his mind was already racing ahead, trying to come up with a new plan. They had lost the battle, but the war was still raging, and they couldn't afford to lose heart now. An unexpected opportunity came in the form of a message from Warlord Zara, a notorious Zorgo separatist who had remained neutral during the conflict. Her encrypted message was brief and to the point. "I have what you need. Meet me on Karalis Station." With few options left, Skora agreed to the rendezvous. Karalis Station was a hive of scum and villainy, a place where the dregs of the galaxy gathered to trade in secrets and illegal goods. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Skora and his team made their way through the station's dark corridors, their weapons at the ready. The meeting with Zara was tense, both sides bristling with weapons and distrust. But when Zara revealed her prize, prototype Arc Fury singularity bombs, Skora knew they had a fighting chance. The bombs were powerful enough to destabilize the core of the alien juggernaut, but delivering them would be a near-impossible task. One last daring plan, Skora told his team as they formulated their strategy. "Eric, you'll lead the strike team. Get those Arc Furies to the alien ship's drive core. It's the only way we can stop it." Eric nodded grimly, already assembling his gear. "We'll get it done, Captain." The assault shuttles launched, each one carrying a team of elite soldiers and the precious cargo of Arc Furies. They flew through the chaos of the battlefield, weaving through debris and dodging enemy fire as they made their way to the juggernaut. The alien ship was a nightmare of defenses, with automated sentries and drones swarming to intercept them. Inside the juggernaut, the team faced unimaginable horrors. The ship's interior was a maze of shifting corridors and rooms filled with bizarre alien machinery that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Every step forward was met with resistance, as the ship's defenses fought to keep them from reaching the drive core. The final challenge came in the form of a colossal alien guardian, a being of pure energy and malice that wielded weapons capable of reducing matter to its constituent atoms. Eric and Thomas moved in perfect sync, years of combat forging them into a deadly unit. The battle was brutal, with each member of the team pushed to their limits, but in the end, they prevailed. The Guardian fell, and Eric planted the Arc Fury charges on the ship's drive core.